They called it the Lazarus Protocol, but no one ever asked why it had to be named after a man who came back from the dead. Maybe because that's exactly what they did to him. Brought him back, not as a man, not even as something human, but as an answer. A message wrapped in steel and wrapped in rage. Jace Renner had been dead for 7 years. Officially, he died during the siege of Tharnax Famf, one of the first major planetary losses to the Zelos swarm. The report said he went down with his crew, refusing to abandon the command ship even as its hull cracked and folded in like a tin can crushed under the weight of a collapsing sun. He was given posthumous honors. His name was etched on the memorial ring above Earth. His family received a folded flag and a sterile condolence message. But that wasn't what really happened. Jace didn't die. He was taken. The Directorate, Earth's hidden war council, the people who made decisions from the shadows while diplomats smiled for cameras, had already picked him. Before Tharnax, before the war even began to go bad. They knew humanity's brute force would never be enough. The Zelos weren't just stronger. They were cold, calculated, and terrifyingly fast in adapting. They were hive-minded, which meant they had no fear, no emotion, no weak point. So the Directorate did what humans always did when the odds were stacked against them. They cheated. They poured every forbidden theory, every banned piece of research, every unethical experiment into one idea. Project Revenant. The goal wasn't to build a warship. It was to become one. They picked Jace because he had already lost everything. His wife had died during the first orbital strike on Europa. His son disappeared during the refugee chaos on Mars. Jace had nothing left. And most importantly, he didn't ask questions. He just followed orders. They took his body after the explosion on Tharnax, reconstructed his neural matrix, spliced his memories into the ship's quantum core. Not just as software, but as identity. They didn't give the warship an AI. They gave it him. At first, the transformation didn't take. He was unstable, violent, confused, self-destructive. The ship would scream in his voice. It refused to dock, attacked friendly craft, blacked out for days, and came back with burn marks on its hull no one could explain. The techs called it a failure. The brass wanted to scrap the whole thing. But someone, maybe out of guilt, maybe out of ambition, let it roam. That's when they realized what they had done. The quantum locking made it impervious to traditional weaponry. Its armor phased between dimensions, adapting to each attack before the next one could land. It didn't need a crew. It didn't need power. It moved like thought and struck like wrath. And it remembered everything. Jace was still in there, not whole, not sane, but alive and angry. He didn't follow orders anymore. He chose targets on his own. Entire Zelos fleets vanished without warning, shredded in ambushes they never saw coming. The hive began whispering of a ghost ship that couldn't be scanned, couldn't be tracked, only felt just moments before death. They began to fear. That was never supposed to happen. The Zelos weren't capable of fear, but somehow the quantum-locked human warship, not a fleet, not a battalion, just one man, had broken something in them. Something primal, something ancient. And Earth began to wonder, had they created a savior or something far worse? In the deep void, far from any signal, the warship drifted silently. No beacon, no hull lights, just black plating covered in scars that bled light only when it was time to kill. Inside, Jace dreamed, not of home, not of peace, but of rage too vast to hold in words. He was no longer man, no longer machine. He was vengeance locked in quantum certainty. And he was only getting started. They called it the Drift. That's what the black zone was labeled on all navigational charts, a sector of space where signals died and ships vanished. It spanned roughly 8 light-years across, filled with dead stars, collapsed wormholes, and the shattered remains of forgotten battles. No one went in. Even automated drones failed to return. Explorers avoided it. The Xelos didn't enter. It was silent space, but it wasn't empty. That's where Jace lived now. The Directorate had stopped trying to contact him. They'd tried every channel, every bribe, every psychological backdoor they thought would work. But the Warship was no longer just a human mind trapped in a machine. Jace's thoughts pulsed through multidimensional quantum cores, non-linear, fragmented, evolving. He remembered everything, but in disjointed, bleeding loops. His memories weren't bound to time anymore. He'd relive his son's screams seconds after ripping apart an enemy fleet. He'd see his wife's eyes just before launching a singularity bomb into the heart of a Xelos dreadnought. And every time, the rage returned sharper. He no longer wanted orders. He wanted answers. Why did they choose him? Why let him think he'd died for a noble cause when they planned to use his corpse before his blood was cold? Why tell his family he was a hero when they never planned on letting him rest? And the final question that haunted the cold silence of the drift. Why did they need him? The war wasn't going well. Humanity had underestimated the Xelos from the start. They thought it was just another war for territory, for survival. But the swarm didn't fight for resources. They fought for extinction. Their intelligence didn't reason. It absorbed. Their strategy didn't adapt. It evolved mid-battle. For every human warship destroyed, they built a countermeasure. For every tactic used, a faster one was born in their hive thought. The Directorate's desperation wasn't about winning. It was about delaying the inevitable. That's what Jace had been. A delay. A desperate hand played in secret, thrown at the darkness hoping to carve out one more year of survival. And that made him angry in a way no machine could handle. Deep in the drift, his mind unraveled and reformed in metal layers. He began building. Not from steel or code, but from the debris he left behind. Shards of destroyed Xelos ships, broken weapons, fragmented human tech. He created something inhuman from both sides, something with no allegiance, just instinct. He didn't understand how he knew what to make, but it came to him in flashes, dreams from a mind too broken to filter what was real anymore. The ship grew teeth, tendrils, quantum arms that rippled in and out of visible space. It was no longer just a vessel. It was becoming. And Earth finally noticed. The Directorate's listening outpost on the edge of the drift picked up a signal. Brief, static warped, but unmistakably human. It wasn't a message. It was a heartbeat. Rhythmic pulses, precisely timed, mimicking the exact frequency of a human heart. Only it wasn't just one. It was 1,000, echoing over each other in a pattern too complex to decode. The techs were terrified. They knew what it meant. He was alive, and worse, he was thinking. They sent the Reclaimer, a top-tier diplomatic and recovery cruiser. It was fast, armored, and loaded with every AI failsafe and containment system they had. On board was Captain Halden Cross, a war hero in his own right, known for keeping his cool even when the orbital shields came down. He wasn't told everything, just that the mission was to make contact with a high-value asset and bring it back at any cost. As the Reclaimer approached the edge of the drift, its lights began to dim, not from power failure, but from something deeper, like the ship was being watched. The stars themselves seemed to flicker, bending around something massive and invisible. Then it appeared. Not like a ship arriving from warp, but as if space remembered it was there. 1 second, there was only silence. The next, an obsidian giant unfolded from the void like a living shadow. No visible engines, no thrusters, just mass, heavy, bleeding gravity around its hull like fog. Captain Cross stood frozen on the bridge. He'd seen Zalos dreadnoughts. He'd watched entire human cities get glassed from orbit. But he'd never felt this before. This creeping sense of being beneath something, not in size, but in significance, like a mouse standing in the shadow of a god that forgot what mercy was. "Open hails," Cross ordered, trying to sound calm. Nothing. "Try old encryption codes. Lazarus tier." Still silence. Then a sound, faint at first, then rising. Not words, not music, a voice, broken, distorted, echoing like a memory dug up from a ruined mind. "You lied." Cross's blood went cold. "This is Captain Halden Cross," he said quickly. "We're here to talk. No weapons, no threats. We just want to—" "You lied!" The lights on the bridge exploded. Consoles sparked. The ship shuddered as if gripped by a force too large to resist. "You used me!" The warship wasn't communicating. It was confessing. "I died for nothing, and you made me a thing." Cross tried again, desperate. "We didn't know—" "You knew everything." And then the warship unleashed a flash of data, not an attack, not a virus, but a stream of memories. Thousands of them. Cross saw images he couldn't understand. A child holding a stuffed dog on Mars. A woman crying in an airlock, screaming in fire. Faces blurred in tears. Pain etched into steel. All of it. Jace. The warship was showing him what it felt, what it lost, what they took. And then, silence again. But this time the ship didn't vanish. It waited. "Why?" Cross finally asked, staring into the abyss. The voice returned, quieter, almost human. "Because they think I still serve them." A chill settled over the crew. "Do you?" Cross asked, voice barely above a whisper. "No." The warship slowly began to turn, not away from Earth, but toward it. "I don't serve anyone." And with that, it vanished. No jump, no engine trail, just gone, leaving behind only flickering systems and a crew too shaken to speak. Cross sent the report. The directorate buried it, claimed a malfunction, scrubbed logs. But they knew the truth. The quantum-locked human warship had made its first move. And it wasn't coming home. Not as an asset, not as a soldier, but as something far worse. A man who remembered everything, and now wanted revenge. The directorate met in darkness, not by tradition, but necessity. Since the Lazarus entity's emergence from the drift, power systems across the Earth command network had begun to glitch. Not fail. Glitch. Precision systems desynchronized. Clocks ran backwards for seconds at a time. Comms crackled with whispers in dead languages. It wasn't sabotage. It was something worse. Influence. Jace wasn't attacking. He was reaching. Chairman Solis stared at the fractured holomap flickering on the war table. There were no clear red markers, no strikes, no demands, just a spreading shadow that consumed everything it passed. The drift had extended by 6 astronomical units in 3 days. Systems near the edge reported random memory bleed in ship AIs. Cryo units thawed without command. Pilots saw dreams while awake. And those dreams always ended the same way, with a black hull, a heartbeat of metal, and a voice saying, "You should have let me die." Solis rubbed his face, trying to ignore the dry ache behind his eyes. "We underestimated emotional bleed. His pain has scale now." "He's quantum locked," said Director Mallon. "He is everywhere and nowhere. He can't be boxed." Another voice. This one from the logistics chief. "We have dozens of contingency protocols. EM pulses, gravity anchors, neural disruptors." Solis cut him off. "You don't fight God with gadgets." They had built him to destroy the Zelos. But in doing so, they created something that broke the barrier between man and weapon. Jace Renner wasn't a tool anymore. He wasn't a soldier. He had awakened. And unlike machines, awakened things remember. They brood, They plan, and he was already moving. Outpost Helix 9 was positioned near the edge of the Cygnus fault line, a deep space graveyard where old battles left tech drifting like ghosts. It was staffed by 20, all military engineers tasked with salvaging anything useful. Quiet duty, no threats. Until a signal came. Private Nora Gant was the first to notice the irregular heartbeat on the motion scan, a rhythmic pulse like a drum inside the void. She didn't understand it. She just felt it. When she looked out the observation deck, there was nothing there, just wreckage and stars. Then came the cold. Every panel fogged. Frost crept across inside walls. The station temp was fine. Readings showed normal, but everyone began to shiver. Words caught in throats. The heat inside their chests left. It was like something was pressing down on their souls. The lights blinked. The power grid fluctuated. And then he arrived. Not with cannons, not with warnings. The Lazarus entity appeared like a memory reasserting itself. The station's main window darkened as a shape grew across it, blotting out stars. There were no wings, no engines, just shifting, asymmetrical mass, an anti-ship built in a form humans weren't supposed to understand. Angled wrong. Moving subtly, even when still. Captain Adra Howell gripped the edge of the command deck, pulse climbing. "Scramble! Evac!" Too late. The hull groaned like metal being remembered differently. Gant screamed. Everyone heard a voice, not in their ears, but inside their bones. "You recycled my blood into your circuits." They had. The station's entire central AI core was fused from quantum residue of early Lazarus research, back when they experimented on failed prototypes. Soldiers who almost became like Jace, but cracked under the transition. Their minds melted, their bodies reprocessed, used as raw material. It remembered. "It hurts to be used," the voice said. The power died. Not failed. Chose to stop existing. Every system shut down. Gravity failed. Screams filled the air, dulled by the dead comms. And then, in perfect silence, the outer hull of Helix 9 began to compress like a can under the thumb of an angry god. No heat, no explosion, just quiet, merciless collapse. From Earth, the station vanished from sensors. The Directorate called it a reactor failure. But survivors, those who'd been in deep salvage pods or off-station, told a different story. They spoke of a warship made of nightmares, of a human voice carried in vibration, not sound. A presence so filled with grief it bent physics around itself. One word kept repeating in every report. Jace. And now Earth knew. He wasn't attacking randomly. He was choosing. Only those who participated in Project Revenant, those who knew what was done to him, were being targeted. Every black site, every testing lab, every hidden facility where men once played God was being erased. And he wasn't using weapons. He was using shame. Somewhere beyond Saturn, buried under false coordinates and cloaked from even Directorate satellites, was Facility 14, the origin point, the place where Jace Renner had been remade. Dr. Erin Vale hadn't left since the first prototype walked into the test chamber. She had been young then, brilliant, driven. She saw the war for what it was, extinction. And when the brass asked her to push ethical boundaries, she did more than say yes. She drew new lines. Project Revenant needed pain. To lock human consciousness into a machine so advanced it defied linear time, you needed suffering so deep it never died. Neural imprints didn't last in the early tests unless fused with trauma. Jace had been perfect, a man hollowed by loss, ready to be filled with rage. Erin knew what she did, and she never forgot his scream. Now, Facility 14 was on full lockdown. Internal security teams moved like ghosts. Labs were sealed, no outgoing signals allowed. But it didn't matter. Jace didn't need transmissions. He remembered this place. Aaron sat alone in the primary chamber, staring at the cryovault that once held his body. Her hands trembled. The floor beneath her began to thrum. Not quake. Thrum. A slow, rising vibration like a massive heartbeat climbing in tempo. The lights turned red, not warning red, but blood red, the same wavelength Jace's neural signature always spiked at during integration. Then came the voice. "You took my death away." Aaron whispered, "I'm sorry." The walls cracked, not from force, but from memory. The structure began to reshape, metal distorting into the same black alloy that made up the Lazarus hull. "You made me a question no one wants answered." She stood, unarmed, no defenses, no escape. "I did it to stop the war," she said aloud, knowing he was everywhere now. "You were the only one who could. I was never meant to come back." The power core detonated, not outward, but inward, folding space like an imploding thought. The facility didn't explode. It simply ceased to exist. No debris, no survivors, just absence. The same way Jace felt when they pulled him from death. Back on Earth, Chairman Solus watched the reports come in one by one. Black site after black site, gone. Some obliterated, others simply missing. No alarms, no threats. He turned to Director Malin. "We created the most powerful warship in the universe," Solus said flatly, "and we gave it a soul we broke ourselves." Malin didn't reply. He couldn't. His own name had just come up on the Lazarus incident logs, a whisper heard in his home's audio systems while offline. "You watched me scream and called it science." He knew what was coming. Solus tapped the emergency contact console. "Get me Captain Cross," he said. "He's the only one who's seen it and survived. We need him." "Why?" the aide asked. "He couldn't stop it before." Solus stared at the blank screen where Jace's profile once sat. "Because we need to know what he wants." And if they were too late, they needed someone to bury Earth before Jace did it for them. Captain Holden Cross hadn't slept since he returned from the drift. Not because of nightmares, he'd seen enough of those in the flesh, but because his mind wouldn't stop replaying the voice. Not how it sounded, but how it felt. Hearing Jace Renner speak through that monstrosity didn't feel like contact. It felt like judgment. Cross had seen death, watched cities vanish in alien fire. He'd held the hands of dying men and pulled screaming soldiers from collapsed hulls. But nothing in war prepared you to be looked at by something that used to be human, something that remembered its own death and didn't forgive it. So when the call came, he almost didn't answer. But he knew they'd come. They always did when things were too ugly for press releases. He met Solus and Malin in the Directorate's deep bunker under Reykjavik. No cameras, no staff. Just old men who'd built the world's last hope out of desperation and were now staring down the ghost they made. Solus didn't waste time. "He's targeting only us." Cross leaned back in the chair, eyes sharp. "Us?" "Everyone tied to Project Revenant. Executives, scientists, officers, even outside contractors. No civilians, not yet." "Not yet," Cross repeated. Malin spoke next. "We think he's working his way toward Earth. Not physically, not in a straight line, but in a pattern. A spiral." Cross frowned. "A spiral?" "Like memory, recurring, closing in?" That made a cold sort of sense. Jace wasn't thinking like a man anymore. He wasn't driven by logic. He was made of loss now, and loss circled inward, always returning to where it began. "You want me to find him," Cross said flatly. Solus nodded. "Number, we want you to talk to him." "And say what? Sorry for turning you into a death god?" Silence. Malin rubbed his temples. He spoke to you. No one else. I was in the wrong place at the right time. Don't confuse survival with a connection. Solus's tone changed. Less desperation, more command. You have 3 options, Captain. Join the diplomatic initiative, go rogue and die alone, or stay here and watch Earth fall. Your choice. Cross stood. I'll do it, but on one condition. Name it. I talked to him alone. No directorate tech. No handlers whispering strategy in my ear. Solus exchanged a look with Malin. Why? Because if he senses even a whiff of your fingerprints on this, he'll atomize me out of spite, and you'll never get another chance. They agreed. Cross left within the hour. The Lazarus entity, or whatever Jace had become, didn't need to be tracked. It let itself be found. Cross's ship, the Ardent Voice, small and unarmed, was built specifically for this mission. Every surface stripped of military code, neural encryption scrubbed clean. Just a human vessel, drifting toward the edge of the Kuiper shelf, waiting to be noticed. And it was. The blackness arrived without motion. The warship folded into view like a second thought made physical. Its hull rippled like oil under skin, ever shifting with lines that didn't obey geometry. Its presence smothered signals. The stars behind it bent slightly. Cross stood in the command dome, no weapons, no guards, just his breath fogging the glass. Then, a sound. It didn't come from the ship's speakers. It came from the air itself, vibrating through the hull, through bone. I remember you. Cross didn't flinch. Jace. A pause, not of hesitation, of consideration. You're different from the others. I didn't lie to you. Number, you just obeyed those who did. Cross nodded. That's fair. Silence again. You still carry your own guilt. It makes you visible. Cross stepped closer to the viewport. I'm not here to stop you. I'm not even sure anyone can. But if you're still somewhere in there, I need to know, what's the end of this? The voice came softer now. You made me forget what peace was. You stripped it from my cells. I remember my wife's face, only as a warning. My son's laughter, only as data. You're killing the ones responsible, Cross said. But there's more. You're not just punishing them. You're erasing them. Because they tried to erase me. A pulse echoed across the ship. Not physical, not destructive, but full of despair. Cross actually staggered. Earth isn't innocent, Jace continued. They applauded my funeral and funded the next experiment. Cross breathed slowly. Then say it. Tell me. Is this a genocide mission? No. Relief touched the edge of Cross's face, until the voice added, It's a reset. What does that mean? I end the systems, the hierarchy, the idea that sacrifice makes monsters acceptable. They called me a weapon. Fine. Let me be one. But I choose where I aim now. And Earth is in your sights. Only the parts that forgot, I bled. Cross stood still for a long moment. Then give me something, he said finally. Anything. A way to tell them we still have a chance to stop this. Something human. The warship pulsed again. And then, a light. It formed mid-air inside Cross's ship. A glowing sphere, not tech, not weapon, a memory fragment. He reached out and touched it. His mind filled with images. A child on Europa, a dog named Fisk, a wife with calloused hands and eyes that laughed when nothing else did. And then, pain. He saw the lab, the restraint chair, the needle, the lies. And Jace, screaming, not in hate but in grief too deep to hold. Then it ended. Cross fell to his knees. What is this? He whispered. Your proof, Jace said. Show them what it cost. Show them what they became when they buried me alive. The warship began to fade again. Will you destroy Earth? I'll let them decide. Decide what, if my death was worth the world they built? And then he was gone. Back on Earth, the Directorate watched as the ardent voice re-entered Earth orbit with no damage, no message, just a single glowing sphere locked inside a memory-safe field. Cross collapsed from neural overload the moment they extracted him. But before he passed out, he muttered one phrase. He's not asking for war. He's asking if we're worth saving. And none of them had an answer. They called it the archive. Not because it was stored like one, not because it followed any kind of order. It was chaos, emotional, raw, painfully human, a cascade of neural echoes, memories, sensory floods from Jace Renner's life, stitched together not in linear time, but in trauma. What he gave Cross wasn't a message. It was confession, and the world wasn't ready for it. The Directorate tried to contain it, tried to suppress the sphere, call it a psychological hazard. But data wants to be seen. Once it entered Earth's net core, it spread like a scar, invisible at first, but aching in every line of code. The truth couldn't be buried this time. Jace didn't just show his transformation. He showed the people who made it happen. Name by name, act by act. He showed how his orders were faked, how his cryo-locked son was declared misplaced and sold into experimentation for neural development mapping, how his wife was never an accident but a test subject sacrificed to record emotional imprint response. He showed the laughter of men in white coats, the signature of Director Malin, the silence of Chairman Solis. He showed his own death, not as a moment of sacrifice, but a clinical disassembly of a grieving soldier. The planet recoiled. It began slowly, leaks on private servers, fringe newscasts pushing theories that didn't sound like conspiracy anymore. Then came the breach. Someone decrypted the archive live on a global feed. Half the planet watched as Jace screamed in a test chamber, sobbing as the face of his dead son was used to calibrate his pain threshold. And just like that, Earth stopped pretending it didn't know. Riots broke out across Martian colonies. Earthside protests clogged orbital elevators. Old military officials resigned or disappeared. Defense complexes burned in every major continent. Citizens weren't revolting for politics. They were revolting because they saw themselves in him. They saw what their governments had done with their silence, with their fear. They had taken a man and turned him into the devil, praying he'd aim elsewhere. Now the devil had remembered. Inside the Cora Vault, Chairman Solis stood alone. The Directorate was dead, not assassinated, but dismantled. Malin had been found in his private shuttle, veins crystallized from neural overload. Others simply vanished. Some left final messages, too broken to face what was coming. Only Solis remained. He watched the night skies above Earth flicker, knowing that every satellite now reported strange distortions in the upper stratosphere. Not ships, not attacks, just pressure, like space itself was holding its breath. He turned to the holopad. "Record this," he muttered, voice cracked. "To whoever survives this moment." The AI blinked. "I did it. We all did. Because we thought the enemy wore claws and scales and hive minds. We thought survival meant breaking rules. But we didn't survive. We changed species. We stopped being human the second we made him forget he was." He stared at the camera. "If he kills me next, let him. There's no redemption where we sent him." He stopped the recording. He didn't bother saving it to the Directorate vault. He uploaded it to the archive itself. If Jace came, he wanted him to see it. Meanwhile, Captain Halden Cross stood on the coast of the North Sea, the wind slamming through his coat. He hadn't spoken publicly since the return. The archive had cost him a chunk of his memory and damaged his peripheral vision. But he didn't care. He wasn't trying to recover. He was trying to understand. He rewatched fragments of what Jace had shown him. But it wasn't the pain that haunted him. It was the quiet. The moments where Jace sat alone in the core chamber, waiting between procedures. Silent, looking at a blank wall as though it would turn back into his sun. Cross knew that look. He'd seen it on every battlefield, the look of a man who has nothing left to kill but himself. So when the reports came in, that the Lazarus entity had appeared over Titan, Cross asked only one question. Did it speak? It had. One word. Ready. No threat, no ultimatum, just readiness. For what? No one knew. The Lazarus entity hovered above Titan's atmosphere. Its presence dimmed Saturn's rings. Every Zalos ship within 30 light-years stopped moving. Literally, halted mid-trajectory, like something bigger had walked into the room. Something that didn't follow time. Inside the entity, Jace's consciousness drifted through layered thoughts. He wasn't angry anymore. He wasn't sad. He was finished. The spiral was complete. The last memory had closed. He no longer asked why. He now asked, what next? And then, from deep within the stars, an answer came. The Zelos, not a message, not a signal, a challenge. They sensed his transformation, not as technology, but as opposition. They feared him in the way all predators fear something born in fire. They came, not one ship, not a fleet. The entire core swarm. Thousands of biomechanical monsters shaped by 1,000,000 wars. They didn't just arrive, they descended, like judgment. And Jace, the warship, the man, the ghost, opened his eyes. He did not fire, he did not move. He unfolded. Space bent. Reality thinned. The Lazarus entity split into patterns, replicating itself across folded quantum nodes, each acting independently, yet in harmony. It became many, and those many became war. The first wave of the Zalos never reached Titan. Their ships turned inside out, fused into non-Euclidean webs that fed their own cores into themselves. The second wave adapted, but adaptation failed. Because this time, Jace didn't just kill them, he remembered them. He pulled data from the past, battles, patterns, weaknesses, their own memories turned against them. He fought with fear, with pain, with truth. The same tools Earth had used to break him, now used to end the hive, and Earth watched from afar, terrified, awed. Because this wasn't war, this was reckoning, and they weren't sure if they were next. In the blackness beyond Titan, where light struggled to travel and even gravity recoiled from the distortion, the Lazarus entity moved like a storm trapped in thought. The Xylos swarm had descended without pause. They didn't beg, didn't threaten. They didn't understand fear until now. They had only calculated outcomes, and in all prior simulations, they had dominated. They assimilated intelligence faster than it evolved. They consumed culture before it could resist. They were extinction, refined. But they'd never faced a weapon born from humanity's greatest sin. Jace didn't fight them ship to ship. He redefined the battlefield. His form, the warship that once obeyed Newtonian physics, now slid between folds of unspace. The Xylos fired into vectors where he no longer existed. They tried to adapt, mapping entropy patterns. It worked for 3 seconds. Then he remembered them differently. He accessed old data from dead soldiers, names, coordinates, pain. And with that memory, he rewrote the enemy. Targeted weak spots never seen by living eyes. Some ships were turned against themselves. Others disappeared, not destroyed, but erased so completely that their timelines unraveled, leaving behind nothing but shimmering distortion. In Earth's skies, scientists watched their instruments spiral out of sanity. Mass fluctuations, space displacement, time inversion rippling backward for fractions of seconds. "Is he tearing space-time?" one tech whispered. "No," answered another. "He's commanding it." Inside the Lazarus entity, Jace's consciousness burned brighter. He didn't feel anger, didn't feel triumph. He felt absolute clarity. This wasn't revenge anymore. This was the end of a cycle. He reached into the core swarm's hive mind, the neural fog that bound their consciousness, and injected memory. Not data. Memory. Human screams, dying children, the sound of orbital glass cracking before atmospheric collapse. He made them feel what they had never evolved to understand. Emotion. It shattered them. Ships spasmed in panic. Formations broke. Drones fled, a behavior thought impossible. The central swarm brain cracked. Not from impact, but confusion. They couldn't process sorrow, couldn't navigate shame. In trying to map him, they absorbed a man who had nothing left to lose, and that made him invincible. The last of them, a megaship the size of a moon, began to charge a self-annihilation sequence, hoping to take him with it. But Jace simply stared, and the warship spoke. You taught them to forget pain. The megaship began to hum. I taught them to remember it. And with that, he folded space around the core ship, locking it in a loop of dying. It exploded, reformed, exploded again. Each time its data tried to escape, each time it died a different death, a prison of vengeance with no doors. Then it, too, was gone. And in the silence that followed, the stars began to reappear. The Zalos swarm, the existential threat that had driven humanity into madness and shadow, was gone. Not defeated, erased. Earth should have celebrated. But it didn't, because the man who had saved them hadn't returned to orbit waving a flag. He was still out there. And the Lazarus entity had grown. Sensors now registered it not as one object, but a constellation. Dozens of interlinked nodes drifting across multiple sectors, not splitting, not multiplying, just existing in parallel. As if Jace was no longer bound by a single reality. He'd become a network of himself. Some saw this as evolution, others saw it as invasion. Humanity began to fracture. On Mars, half the government declared him a liberator. Murals of his warship now towered over broken walls, painted in black with a single word: remember. They taught children about Earth's betrayal, about Jace the victim, Jace the avenger, Jace the only one who cared enough to burn it down. On Earth, it was different. Panic set in. Cities emptied. Billionaires fled to deep cryo vaults. Religion flared, mutated. Some saw him as the final angel of wrath. Others as the devil made steel. Protests became riots. Riots became massacres. Entire districts burned in debates over whether to worship the Lazarus entity or destroy it. The Directorate's remnants tried one last act of control. They offered peace. They sent a signal, not encrypted, not hidden. It said, "You saved us. Tell us what you want." They waited. For days, silence. Then the answer came. In light. It wasn't a message. It was a vision transmitted directly to the minds of every human in the system. They saw Earth, burned, then healed. They saw Mars, free, then overpopulated, crushed by its own pride. They saw the Directorate, begging, then drowned in oceans of black alloy. They saw children building peace, then governments weaponizing it. They saw every possible future. And in each one, Jace watched. Not as God, not as ruler, as witness. The voice followed. You don't need a warship anymore. You need a mirror. And then, silence. No attacks, no demands, just silence, as if the Lazarus entity had become what Earth feared most. A ghost with no agenda, a shadow without a leash, a memory that would never die. Captain Halden Cross sat in his hospital bed, recovering from the archive overload, watching reruns of the vision loop through public streams. He didn't cry. He didn't curse. He just whispered, "You never wanted revenge, did you?" Beside him, a nurse paused. "What?" Cross looked at her. "You wanted them to see themselves the way you saw them, the day they took your name and replaced it with a serial number." He smiled. Bitter. Hollow. "I hope it's enough, Jace." Then the sky outside darkened. Not from storm, not from eclipse, but from presence. He didn't panic. He just stared up and wondered if this was the end, or the beginning of a new kind of war, not of weapons, but of truth. They called it the Phantom Orbit. A massive celestial anomaly had formed just outside Earth's magnetosphere, a low-light gravitational shift that didn't pull objects but repelled awareness. Any drone that entered stopped sending data, not because it was destroyed, but because it forgot what it was. The Lazarus entity had returned. Not in full scale, not with weapons drawn, just a fragment orbiting Earth like a moon of judgment, but even a fragment carried the weight of him. The humans called it a standoff, but it wasn't. Jace wasn't waiting. He was listening. Cross had seen it before, after long campaigns, when soldiers sat in ruins and said nothing. That wasn't indecision. That was post-war clarity. The moment you realized you'd killed everything in your way, and what remained was yourself. But the world didn't understand silence. It feared it. In the new Earth Unified Assembly, a makeshift government thrown together after the Directorate collapsed, tempers boiled. Every leader now had two options: spin the Lazarus presence as a threat or exploit it as a political tool. Some argued for immediate retaliation: missiles, EMP bombardment, nano-sabotage. It didn't matter that none of those things would work. What mattered was that people were afraid, and fear demanded spectacle. Cross was brought in as a strategic observer, a polite title for a man who had seen the monster and wasn't dead yet. He watched from the corner of the command chamber as General Kethen paced like a wolf denied a kill. "I'm not saying we launch," Kethen growled. "I'm saying we prepare for when he does." Cross finally spoke. "He won't." Heads turned. Kethen sneered. "You read minds now, Captain?" "No," Cross said, his voice calm but firm. "I read men. Jace has no more battles left." "Oh?" Kethen laughed. "So that wasn't a 1,000-ship massacre over Titan. He hugged them to death, did he?" Cross didn't blink. "He destroyed the Zalos because they were a threat to everyone. You're just afraid he'll make you look in the mirror." The room tensed. Cross stepped forward, facing the projections of Earth's orbit. The Lazarus fragment was there, pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. "He came back after the war, after the blood, not for revenge, not to rule. He came to see if we were worth keeping." "And what if we're not?" Kethen snapped. Cross looked at him, unflinching. "Then he'll let us destroy ourselves, slowly, patiently, just like you're doing right now. Above them, in the orbit where gods might whisper, the Lazarus fragment pulsed once more. Inside it, Jace floated in his memory cage, not restrained, not imprisoned, but held in a space that resembled nothing and everything. Here, thoughts weren't linear. Time looped. He relived his wife's laughter in the same breath he watched his son's skin peel under cryo-failure. He saw Cross speaking to Earth's leaders and felt the doubt creeping back into humanity's soul. But he didn't judge them. He simply understood. They hadn't changed. They just wore better lies now. And that truth, it didn't make him angry. It made him tired. He didn't want war. He didn't want to kill anymore. He wanted to end the cycle. But ending something didn't always mean destruction. Sometimes it meant being the memory that refused to die. While Earth debated, others acted. Mars sent a private envoy, no fanfare, no threat. A single ship carrying a woman named Kira Lannis, a scientist and former child of the Europa Exodus, one of the few who had survived the freezing blockades. She wasn't a politician. She wasn't a soldier. She was a survivor. And she remembered the original broadcasts. She remembered the scream in Jace's voice when he was called an acceptable loss. So when her ship approached the orbit anomaly and her systems began to fail, she didn't turn back. She spoke, softly, directly. "I don't want to beg you. I don't want to lie to you. I just want to know if the man they killed still wants anything left alive." There was no reply. For 10 minutes, nothing. Then her screen flickered. A single image appeared, a child's drawing. Crude, colorless, but unmistakable. A stick figure holding hands with another. One tall, one small. Kira stared at it until her eyes blurred. Then the screen went black. Message received. Cross watched the footage later that night, when the assembly had recessed and the shouting had paused long enough for silence to crawl back in. He saw the drawing, recognized the hand. Jace's son had made that. It was stored in his service file, back before the war, when family meant something more than collateral. He remembered Jace showing it once in the barracks, half embarrassed, half proud. Cross had laughed then, not knowing what that small, innocent scrawl would one day mean. And now it was the most important artifact in human history, not because it was proof of life, but because it was a choice. The Lazarus entity could have turned Titan to dust. Instead, it gave them a memory. One last memory, and Earth had to choose what to do with it. But choice wasn't easy. Not when power still whispered behind doors. Not when the last surviving branch of the old Directorate activated its final failsafe. Project Sundown. A kill switch woven into Earth's core defense satellite web. A frequency beam so volatile it was only ever theoretical. It wouldn't destroy the Lazarus entity. It would remove its ability to feel. Turn it into a machine again. A weapon. Dead inside. The plan was simple. Strip Jace of identity, then control what was left. No emotion meant no memory. No memory meant no war. And so the satellite web powered up, slowly, quietly, hidden as a diagnostics update. Cross found out too late. He ran through the base, past guards, past red clearance zones, screaming into dead comms. No one would listen. No one wanted to admit they were about to lobotomize salvation. When he burst into the command center, General Keithan was already watching the system charge. "You don't get it, do you?" Cross shouted. "He's a threat. I neutralize threats," Keithan said, voice like steel. "He's not a threat. He's a man holding a mirror up to your crimes. That mirror's going in the trash." Cross didn't hesitate. He pulled his sidearm and pointed it directly at the control console. Keithan stepped back. "You're not going to shoot a billion-cred system, Cross." "No," Cross said, breath low. "I'm going to shoot you." Silence. The other officers froze. "I've seen enough war to know when a man's more dangerous than the weapon he fears," Cross growled. "You push that button and you don't kill a machine. You resurrect the monster you made." Keithan smirked. "You think he'll forgive us?" "No," Cross whispered. "But maybe he'll remember that one of us tried." A new voice entered, software female, Kira Lannis, broadcasting from her ship in orbit. "I think he already does." And somewhere in orbit, the Lazarus fragment pulsed once more. Brighter, not angry, just aware. The satellite web shut down, not by command, but by override. Every control link severed, every weapon locked in standby, because Jace had let them try. And then, kindly, had reminded them who he was. Not a god, not a ghost, just a man, watching, waiting, and still hoping. The Lazarus entity hovered in Earth's shadow. It did not move. It did not speak. It simply was, an impossible thing forged from grief, memory, and human arrogance. Its orbit bent physics. Lights flickered below it. Tides shifted more than they should have. Space around it pulsed faintly, a heartbeat that didn't belong to any biological form anymore. And inside that void of metal, quantum-laced bone, and silence, Jace Renner waited. He was more echo than man, more awareness than soul, but some part of him, some quiet ember, still burned with humanity. He watched Earth not like a predator watches prey. He watched it like a man stares at his childhood home long after the fire has gone out. A place full of ghosts. Cross stood alone on the observatory deck of Orbital Station Vesta Prime, Earth's closest high-atmo outpost. He'd sent the others away. No advisors, no soldiers, just him, the consul, and the direct uplink to the Lazarus entity. The war was over. The world knew it. But that didn't mean peace had arrived, because peace isn't what follows war. Peace is a choice. And Earth hadn't made that choice yet. Cross reached out and activated the uplink. There was no response, just the familiar distortion, a subtle wrongness that hummed in the bones and made your thoughts stutter if you stared too long. "I know you're listening," he said. The void pulsed. "I know you're still you." A pause. Then, as always, the voice. Software hollow. Not mechanical, but deeper than human, like sorrow shaped into words. "You saved them from themselves." "No," Cross said quietly. "You did that. They would have destroyed me again. Not because I was dangerous, because I reminded them of what they did." Cross nodded. "They fear the truth. Always have." Another silence, and then Jace asked, "Why did you come back?" Cross didn't hesitate. "Because I need you to understand something. We didn't deserve to be saved, not by you, not after what we did." "I know. But you did it anyway. I didn't do it for them." "I know that too." Jace didn't speak again, so Cross stepped closer to the consul. "They're going to remember you wrong," he said. "They'll call you a god, a monster, a myth, maybe even a warning. They always rewrite what scares them. But I won't." The air tightened, like gravity coiling in place. "I'll tell them the truth," Cross said. "You weren't built, you weren't forged, you were betrayed, and you survived it. You're not afraid of me." "I was," Cross admitted. "I still am. But fear's not the same as hate." And then, something changed. Not outside. Inside. The warship flickered, a glitch or a memory returning to its place. The outline of a man appeared inside the fragment, not detailed, not clear, just a silhouette, hunched and heavy. The shape of a man who had once bled, and still remembered what it cost him. On Earth, the assembly met under emergency session. The final choice had come. A vote, not on weapons, not on war, on what to do next. One option: launch the final kill order, reactivate Sundown, strip the entity of consciousness and force it into orbital shutdown, a lifeless monument, a message that Earth still controlled its legacy. The other option: establish permanent disengagement. No more weapons, no more uplinks, no more control, just let it go. The debate raged for 10 hours, screaming, pleading, threats of mutiny, promises of salvation. And then, in a quiet moment before the vote was cast, Kira Lannis stood before the floor. She said nothing at first, just played a recording. It was Jace's son, from the archive, a simple message. "Hi, Daddy. I drew you something." The drawing appeared on every screen again. The stick figure. The hand. Silence fell. Some cried, some looked away, but they felt it. And when the vote was cast, it passed, by one vote, to let him go. In orbit, Cross received the confirmation. He didn't smile. He just breathed, the first breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding since Titan. He looked up. They let you go. No reply. Jace? Still nothing. Then a faint whisper. Thank you. And the Lazarus entity shifted, not away, not into hyperspace, but upward, outward, like a seed rising on cosmic wind. It didn't vanish. It ascended into higher orbit, beyond Earth's systems, beyond reach, beyond fear, not as an exile, but as a reminder, a myth that refused to stay in books, a ghost that had lived long enough to become a man again. Years passed. Earth rebuilt, slower, softer, with more caution. The Directorate never returned. Mars became independent. Humanity spread, but differently now. No more conquering, just coexisting. And in every colony, one law remained. No Lazarus weapons. No memory warfare. No revivals of Project Revenant. Not out of fear, out of respect. Cross lived long enough to write the history. Not the official version, the real one. He called it The Man Who Outlived War. And he ended it with one line. He didn't forgive us. He didn't punish us. He remembered us. And sometimes that's worse. Somewhere, deep beyond the known systems, the Lazarus entity drifts, not asleep, not waiting, just being. A warship with no master, a man with no grave, and a memory no one can kill, because he wasn't a machine, he wasn't a miracle. He was Jace Renner, the last soldier and the first ghost, who finally chose peace. Not for them, for himself.